Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good evening to our speakers and participants. Welcome to today's webinar organized by the Islamabad Policy Research Institute on the subject Media and Social Media Bias in the Coverage of Palestine-Israel Crisis. We have with us three distinguished speakers and the webinar will be moderated by Dr. Zahid Shahab Ahmed. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Zahid Ahmed is a researcher working on peace and security in South Asia and the Middle East. He has worked with numerous international organizations such as the Commonwealth Foundation, United States Institute of Peace, Transparency International, and many others. Dr. Ahmed has published and presented papers on a wide range of issues such as foreign policy, international organizations, Islam, peace and conflict, regionalism, and regional security. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I would now introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Ambassador Asif Durrani. Ambassador Durrani joined the Pakistani Foreign Service in 1986 and has since held various diplomatic assignments in Pakistani missions in New Delhi, Tehran, New York, Kabul, and London. He regularly contributes in the national and international electronic media as an analyst on international issues and is currently serving as a senior research fellow at IPRI. Ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker of the day is Ms. Mona Shataya. Ms. Shataya is a digital rights defender working in the Arab region. She is currently the local advocacy manager at Hamle, the Arab Center for the Advancement of the Social Media. She joined Hamle in 2017 as an advisory board member. Ms. Shataya had previously worked in the fields of communications and campaigns with several civil society organizations. She was the community outreach coordinator at Transparency Palestine, which is the national chapter of Transparency International. Ladies and gentlemen, our final speaker of today's webinar is Mr. Dan Cohen. Mr. Cohen is an award-winning journalist and filmmaker. He is the host behind The Headlines, an investigative news outlet. He has also produced videos and written reports from across Israel and Palestine, the United States, and Latin America. He filmed and co-produced a documentary, Killing Gaza. Unfortunately, Mr. Cohen could not join us at this very moment due to some personal commitment, but he will try to join us later on. Now, before we begin with the proceedings, I request all participants to keep sending in the questions and please mention your name and designation followed by your question. Ladies and gentlemen, I now request our Acting President IPRI, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, for the welcome address. Sir, over to you, please.
Thanks, Zishan. I welcome all the distinguished panelists. Dr. Zahid, it's nice to see you again. I hope I'm audible to everybody. So today's topic is very important and we are looking forward to a very enlightened discussion. And I'm sure seeing the distinguished panelists, it will be a very good discussion and we'll be able to get across a few very important key messages on a topic which is of great relevance both to the Muslim world and the general population of the world, because this is not only Israeli Palestinian specific issue, it is a humanitarian issue nowadays. We all know what is unfolding, the tragedy that has unfolded in the past and the tragedy that is unfolding at the moment in Gaza, an area which is just 25.7 miles geographically and with 2.1 million inhabitants. It is one of the most deprived areas where 75% of the population is facing serious HDI indicators deficit. And the 50% of the inhabitants are jobless. This tragedy unfolded in 2006 once this Gaza area was completely surrounded and a kind of a siege and blockade is in fact exercised, wherein the population is not allowed to come out and go out without going through the checkpost. So this is a aspect of a tragedy which is not very well propagated, because through the lens and prism of the media, which has its own interests, most of the reality, it gets diluted. I'm reminded here of one of the sayings of Baruch Kimmerling, who said that Gaza, even before 2004, it was one of the greatest concentration camps in the world. Now you can well imagine the situation which might be prevailing after 2006, nearly 15 years of siege that the inhabitants have endured. There are several aspects of the tragedy, political, economic, and the military dimensions. And I'm sure the participants and discussants, they are very competent to parse open several dimensions to, come up with the solutions to this tragedy also, because we as the bystanders need to be cognizant of the fact that international community is watching this with renewed interest, because unlike in the past, this issue and its reverberations have found greater resonance amongst the global population in European countries, transatlantic, United States, and even in the Arab countries. So this is one aspect which gives us hope that perhaps the mankind can, rally its, solidarity to find a solution to this issue, so that the lot of the incarcerated inhabitants is ameliorated. So with these few words, I hand you over Zishan to formally begin the proceedings and invite the speakers to start the discussion. Over to you, Zishan.
Thank you very much, sir. With that, Dr. Zahid, please, you may proceed with the moderation of the session, and welcome to the webinar.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Zishan, and thank you to the acting president of IPRI, Mr. Janjua. It is always a pleasure to collaborate with IPRI and to also now see that it is paying attention to some of the emerging issues and some issues that have largely been ignored as far as debates in the think tank circles are concerned, and also in the academia. And as we witnessed following the recent bloodshed and destruction in Gaza, news outlets around the world were engaged in constructing different versions of the events. In general, we noticed that violence and wars become the most compelling news stories of all. And this was the case this time around as well. So the incidents received a significant coverage in the media around the world. Other than the unfortunate ones who suffer from the realities of wars, the majority outside of those contexts depend on media reports to form their views. So, considering us, I'm living in Australia, and also people in Pakistan depend on international media for the coverage. And while there can be questions raised on which media outlet is biased or not, individual journalists also face difficulties while reporting political violence and wars. And I was just actually reading a piece in The Conversation by Annabelle, and she writes that, quote unquote, while professional ethics of journalism demand objectivity, language just won't come to the party. This is because language has no neutral mode. Once you step into the process of saying anything about the violence in Gaza, language makes you take a side. And I think this is a very key point, and in this discussion we'll be actually unfolding many of those aspects as well. And as readers of news, people need to be conscious of these aspects, and in this regard, I'm hopeful that this discussion will be very fruitful to understanding the role of media, not just the mainstream media, but also social media, with reference to the situation in Palestine. And this is also timely considering how recently a CNN reporter responded to Pakistan foreign minister's criticism of the Israeli influence on the international media. You may recall that she called Shah Mahmoud Qureshi's comments being anti-Semitic. So I think it's important to also discuss what is anti-Semitic. And also we have now seen how the media has also been directly targeted in the recent attacks in Gaza. So considering this, I think we have a very good group of guests here and who can contribute a lot. In terms of the order, when I'm posing joint questions to the speakers here, I request that Mona, you go ahead and you answer it first, and then over to Ambassador Durrani. And we don't have a third speaker. Dan, for now, let us see once he joins in, and then I'll pose the same questions to him as well. So my first question to both of you is that how do you view the reporting of the international media on the Palestinian issue? So it's a very open-ended kind of a question, because I want to get your overall impression of the media's coverage of the Palestinian issue. So maybe we can start with Mona and then over to Ambassador Durrani.
Hi, Zahid. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us today to discuss this important topic. So, yeah, as you said from before, there is usually, we Palestinians, we feel like we are miscommunicated in the international media. We feel like the media coverage for the attacks from the Israeli authorities against Palestinians, either in Jerusalem or in Gaza Strip or any other part of Palestine, is really miscommunicated. Even when it comes to the terminologies are not really covering what's happening on the ground. For example, most of the international media is using the word conflict, while we can't say like this is a conflict. If we can like make an analysis or review Human Rights Watch analysis that was published a couple of months ago, we can see clearly, be clearly seen that the reality on the ground is apartheid state. So we as Palestinians are living under occupation, under military occupation, or under apartheid. So we can never use the word conflict, for example, to describe what's happening on the ground. And this is very problematic issue when we saw this terminologies in the international mainstream media, and it's really affecting how the public audience, the international audience, are forming their perception about what's happening in Palestine. We even feel miscommunicated when even the international media are not covering what's happening on Palestine. They are only taking most of the time the Israeli narrative. And this is actually very problematic because we feel like we dehumanized. We don't have like a Palestinian stories for people who are living on the ground and who are exposed to attacks from the Israeli authorities. And this is, we have been summaries for these cases over the past 73 years, but we actually can see like a bit differences now with the last attack that occurred 1 month ago. We saw like how social media platforms open a new way and a new communication channel for activists and for young people and for young human rights defenders to communicate in our own way and to tell our own story in the way that we want to be communicated. And this actually, we feel like it helped us to change, let's say, or to make small changes in the international mainstream media coverage for what's happening in Palestine. We can't say like this is the best coverage ever, but at least we saw like a human in New York Times this time is covering a personalized and human stories from Gaza Strip. We saw like children pictures at the front page of the New York Times, which is really a big issue. It should not be like a big issue. It should be the normal thing. But for this time, because it's the first time, it's a big issue. And here we can see the effect or the impact of the social media and how the social media helped us to share our stories despite all the difficulties and all the obstacles that we were facing from the Israeli government and also from the social media companies in a try to silence us, to silence Palestinians, and to erase or take down the Palestinian narrative from the social media platforms. But at least we saw like a small changes here and there with the international media, despite all the big problems with the terminologies that are being used nowadays. So, for example, we can never ever compare between what's happening in Gaza Strip and attacking when Israeli soldiers are attacking citizens who are living, innocent citizens and children, and buildings, residential buildings, and what's happening in other parts of the world. We can't make like these are equal forces that are attacking each other, or we can't even sometimes use the word war, because war, it means like we have a balance in the two forces, while what's happening in the on the ground is a bit different. Gaza is under siege for the past since 2006, and people they don't have the right to movement, they don't have the right to go away from Gaza. So this is like a part of the daily lifestyle that people in Gaza are living. So we can't make this unfair comparison between the Israeli forces and Gaza Strip. So this is like the baseline where we can start to talk about the media coverage for Gaza Strip, to talk about the terminologies, to talk about the big issues that should be covered and it's not covered there in Gaza Strip. And it was clearly seen that the war this time, or the attack this time, is attack on information. We saw internet cut off from Gaza Strip. We saw electricity cut. We saw also attacking the media, the international media buildings, like when Israeli forces, they bombed the AP and Al Jazeera building. So it was like a war on information. We were also attacked on social media platforms, where the Israeli cyber unit was pressuring and putting pressure on the social media companies to take down the Palestinian content, and where many human rights defenders in Palestine, they were receiving SMSs and phone calls from the Israeli intelligence service, intimidating them and threatening them if they don't remove or delete the documentation of the human rights violations that we are exposed to on the ground. So we are in front of a big problem. We are in front of a systematic efforts to silence Palestinians on the social media, on media, and preventing us from sharing our story and our narrative. So this is like the base where I see we can start. And if you have like any follow-up questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mona. I'll come back to you after listening to what Ambassador Durrani has to say in response to this question.
Thank you, Dr. Zahid, and thank you very much. I think Mona has elaborately discussed the issue in detail. And when you talk about the Palestinian issue, from the very beginning, it faces discrimination. It faces apartheid. It faces kind of a colonialism. But unfortunately, when you talk about the media coverage or treatment of the media of the Palestinian issue, so it gets a stepmotherly treatment. And this is what has been happening throughout, right from 1948 onwards. When you look at the resolutions and further, when the Palestinians were uprooted from their land. And if you go through, there have been surveys about New York Times, almost 300,000 articles which were printed during 30,000 articles printed from first Intifada to second Intifada. Those were, the majority of them were sympathetic to the Israelis. Their version was given priority as compared to what Palestinians have been saying. And then another aspect of this whole drama is that not only Palestinian version gets the precedence, but also they equate the issue with the Palestinians as a are equal. And they use the word terminologies, as rightly pointed out by Mona, terminology like conflict. It means that this conflict means that Palestinians are an equal guilty party. And then another discrimination which is done by the United States and Western governments is that they, in this present Intifada, in this present Israeli onslaught, they used the term right of Israeli self-defense. Now, this is absolutely absurd when you look at it, how they have been treating this issue. It is not the right of defense for the Israelis, actually. Look at the casualties. 12 casualties versus 258. There's no match. I mean, this kind of a response which they have done it. So what are we talking about? And when the social media, in fact, started giving the true picture, so social media came under pressure from the providers, and Israeli version took the precedence. I mean, unfortunately, I have to draw a parallel in the Palestinian situation and the Kashmir situation. Again, on the social media, their voices are curbed, and when it comes to treatment in the mainstream media, they say it is a dispute between Pakistan and India in a way, but the Kashmiris are getting, the bad treatment. Kashmiris are now becoming the Red Indians. So same is happening with the Palestinians. Over the years, right, 1948, Israel's geography has expanded, while Palestine's territory has shrunken. So it has shrunk to a level where now, when you talk about Gaza, or when you talk about the West Bank, or wherever the Palestinians are, ultimately they will end up in ghettos. They as a separate state, they will not have any direct contact with each other. In such a situation, what kind of a two-state solution are we talking about? So, and these realities are not looked into by the so-called objective media. Now, when it comes to Palestinian issue, they become objective. Now, what kind of objective they want to use and what kind of a language they want to use, this is exactly the choice of. For instance, they talked about Sheikh Jarrah as evictions, as if this is quite legal. Now, this is not at all. In fact, they wanted to, kick them out from Al-Jarrah to expand their colonies. And then terminologies like clashes, conflict, and flare-up, these are those are asymmetrical responses to what has been done. And then it all started with Jerusalem, where the Muslims were denied to pray. And then the question of Al-Jarrah came, where they used quote-unquote evictions. And it was not eviction. And then what happened, Hamas's threat, and then onwards, when they fired the rockets. Look at Israel's now military progress. When you talk about Iron Dome, it means that Israel also had an opportunity to show to the world that how militarily strong it is. And when you compare Israel with the Hamas, forget about it. I mean, come on, what are we talking about? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, Israel is on 10 and Hamas is -1. So I think we have to be realistic about what is happening in terms of Palestine, and there's a need to show a mirror to the media, the so-called independent media, which otherwise wastes no time in talking about human rights happening in anywhere in the world. And to their opponents, they just go, they are so charitable that they go berserk talking about human rights. When it comes to the human rights of the Palestinians, then they keep mum. Then they talk about the objectivity. Then they use the terminologies like evictions and conflicts. So this is a duality. This is you can say, I have to be blunt, this is a hypocrisy. And this is a hypocrisy. It is not even a real politics. Even the real politic, those who have been teaching in Harvard about real politics or realism or for that other theories of international relations, even then it doesn't fit into that definition. So I can go on, but I think we should listen more from Mona, because from there and from she has more to say, and of course I'll chip in whenever you want to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, before I ask the next question to all the viewers, if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A section in the Zoom. So now moving on to the next question. Now, I already talked about Shah Mahmood Qureshi's interview on CNN. and how his specific comments on Israeli control of international media were labeled by the anchor person as being anti-Semitic. So this raises a very valid question. Do you think criticizing the state of Israel is anti-Semitic? So starting from Muna again and over to then Ambassador Durrani, what are your views on this?
Well, I won't start from the CNN interview, but I would start from something earlier happened where the Israeli lobby around the world, they are trying to push the IHRA, the new IHRA definition, where they can use the word Zionist as a proxy for Jewish. And this is like very problematic for us. And we at Hamla, we had a very big campaign against that, because Facebook, they were almost they were in front of a big decision a couple, it's like 8, 9 months ago. They were discussing the new definition of the IHRA. They were thinking about adapting the IHRA where they will use the word Zionist as a proxy to the word Jewish. And we see like this is a very big issue. This is very, important and crucial discussion that should be happened, because when we are talking, if the social media companies are dealing with the new IHRA definitions, or when they are adapting this definition, that means when people are criticizing Israel or Israeli policies, where not only Palestinians are the only people who are affected by the Israeli policies, they have this brand for themselves as a world leaders in the military products and in the surveillance products. So any other country or any other oppressive government who can buy these military tools and products and also surveillance technologies from Israel, and if their people are going to criticize Israel for for its policies in Palestine, or even because they are producing such technologies, they might be also being classified as, or they might be their content might be classified as under this new definition. And this is really like problematic issue, because we can't stop criticizing Israel for what's being for what we are exposed to. I mean, we are living under military occupation or a settler colonialism. We are exposed to human rights violations on a daily basis. I'm coming through 2 checkpoints every day when I'm moving between my home and my office. So I can't stop criticizing this regime. I can't stop criticizing what's happening here. I can't stop criticizing everything about this military occupation that we are living in. So we will continue to criticize the Israeli authorities till they end their discrimination against us Palestinians. And because of that, we had this huge campaign with many other organizations around the world to stop Facebook from adapting this term. And actually, we had this global campaign. It's called Facebook We Need to Talk. It was fruitful. Till now, Facebook, they did not announce anything about this definition. We hope that they don't, or they won't adapt this new definition, but it's really problematic. I mean, the Israeli lobby is not only putting pressure on the social media companies, but they are also putting pressure on other academic and other organizations around the world to adapt the same definition that they are suggesting to the social media companies. And as I mentioned, this is really problematic because it will systematically contribute in silencing Palestinians and other human rights defenders around the world who's criticizing Israel and its policies, discriminatory policies against Palestinians. So maybe like this is the base or the ground where I can talk about the anti-Semitic. And also we should, as Ambassador Asif said, we should also discuss the word anti-Semitic, because now with what we lived in the past month, we we saw like many smears campaign against many celebrities and many organizations where they were described as anti-Semitic because they are criticizing the Israeli the human rights violations, the Israeli human rights violations against Palestinians on the ground. We saw Bella Hadid and Gigi Hadid and other celebrities around the world because they were standing with Palestinians and they were talking about the Israeli discriminatory policies. They had these there was like a systematic smear campaigns against them. It was targeted them, and they were described as anti-Semitic. And this is also like I think we should make a stop and think about the anti-Semitic definition and to know where we are going, because it's clearly like it would work to shrink our spaces and to limit and have new restrictions on the freedom of expression if we adapt this kind of definitions. So this is basically how it's been used against Palestinians and other even if it's individuals or even if they are organizations when they have a pro-Palestinian position with Palestinians, or they are criticizing the Israeli policies, discriminatory policies against us.
Thank you. Over to you, Ambassador Dorani, if you want to reply to this question.
Yeah, I think about Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi's remarks that Israel has got deep pockets and terming it as anti-Semite. I mean, it was just bizarre. I mean, ridiculous. The question is that it's not a secret that CNN and who, in fact, controls the media. And even in New York Times, who are the owners and who control it. And then there is a crime to talk against anything which has to do with the Jews. And now the new paradigm has come into this whole thing. Earlier, you could condemn Zionism, but not anymore. And this is what, when he talked about Zionism, Foreign Minister, so again, it was, and then as an anchor person, becoming a party to the dispute was again quite unusual, because never seen any anchor person telling the foreign minister that please don't be anti-Semitic in her concluding remarks. And something, I mean, which one has never seen. Even if you put harsh questions or you answer whatever you answer, the anchor persons, they don't in a way become a partisan to a particular debate. They lose their so-called objectivity, quote unquote. So in this particular case, the anchor person was quite partisan, and as if it was a dialogue between our foreign minister and an Israeli official. So this is somehow I can sum up on that. And related to this is that the whole issue has been dehumanized, and there is no there's no value to the human life, no worth given to the human life if it concerns Palestine or Palestinian people or their children. New York Times, Mona just referred to about that they gave a front page story about the children who were killed. This is the first time. Reason is that they got scared. They got scared of the publicity in the social media they received, that they would have lost their own readership. It is almost a crime to talk about anything about Israel in the United States or in the West. No, this is we are living in a world where it's absolutely a one-sided play, and on that, Palestinians, hats off to them that they are struggling on daily basis. The kind of walls they have erected, they have to cross 2, 3, 4 barriers every day, and the kind of humiliation they have to go through it. If only you do stories on that, those are heart-rending stories, which I have had my Palestinian friends during my diplomatic life, and even they are diplomats. And when they have to go to their homes, whether it is in Gaza or in the in the West Bank or wherever they live, they say that it takes them more than 24 hours just from crossing Jordan border to their homes. This is the minimum, and the kind of weight and the humiliation they have to go through it while they themselves, they are the diplomats. So, and in this situation, when you discuss a dispute or an issue where the people of Palestine are at the receiving end, equating them as a part of a conflict is, in fact, it itself is inhuman. So this is, and the world conscience on that, when it comes to UN Human Rights Council, so Israel gets the drubbing. And in that, then Americans and other Western countries, they cast negative vote. When it comes to the UN General Assembly, they cast negative vote, but they can't do much in the UN General Assembly. But when it comes to the UN Security Council, now you have seen the recent debate. It was US versus 14 other countries. Even other four veto power wielding countries, they even supported the Palestinian version. So we are definitely, there's no, when we are debating about this dispute, there's no doubt about it that Israel ends up as an aggressor. It ends up as an entity which is an occupier, which is colonizer. And this has been the of the colonialism, whether traded against the Kashmiri people or the Palestinian people, that they justify. And it is, again, there is a parallel that both Israel and India has been talking about their right to self-defense while they are perpetrating the atrocities or human rights violations against whether it's Palestinians or the Kashmir. So I can imagine and I can feel the pain, because we see this kind of a pain which the Kashmiris have been going through since 1947 onwards, and the Palestinian pain and their agony since 1948 onwards. And it is growing, and it's growing by the day. Same will happen in Kashmir, that because with these laws, draconian laws, and the enactment and the revocation of Article 370 and 35A, they will make demographic changes in the occupied state, and then they'll say, oh, well, now we are ready for the plebiscite. So here in Palestine, even the question of plebiscite does not arise. In fact, they will be made just, the Israelis are now going for a one-state solution. It is not going to be two states, because they will just be reduced status where what kind of a governance they would have it. And they are still now perpetrating, and the differences between Hamas, Al-Fatah, and Islamic Jihad, those are being played up disproportionately. But now, when they were all united on their cause, no one talked about that. No one, in fact, talked about this kind of a unity displayed by those Palestinians. Everyone suffers. In politics, haven't you seen what happened in Israel itself, where Netanyahu has to lose, and then Naftali Bennett has to take over, and he'll be running a government of more political parties, including one, the Palestinians, and there the politics has made strange bedfellows for them. But here, when you talk about the Palestinians, so they get disproportionate, lashing when it comes to their differences. But when they want to raise their issues, they are dubbed as terrorists. They are dubbed as so this is a fact that we are living in an where only the powerful, he has got the sway, they can go scot-free, whatever they want to. But I think this will also have a limited shelf life, and this is not going to work like this. We have seen what happened to other colonial powers and what happened subsequently. So I think it is only a matter of time. But at the same time, the kind of human suffering one witnesses is unacceptable, intolerable, and despicable. Yes.
Thank you very much. So now I'll have a couple of questions, first for Mona and then for Ambassador Durrani, and then we'll open the Q&A session. I see that I've already received quite a number of questions. So my first question for Mona, how do you view a Human Rights Watch report stating that Israeli authorities are committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid? Do you think the use of terminology apartheid is like in a way encourages maybe activists on the ground in Palestine, or in what context do you view this terminology?
Is this a question for me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Zahid. So yeah, as I mentioned from before, like a Human Rights Watch, they have this analysis and they have this report that analyzed why the reality in Palestine is being apartheid reality. We are living under apartheid, and it describes and it gives explanation why it's apartheid. It makes like a clear comparison between Palestinians where they, despite where they are live, either in Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinians in West Bank, in Gaza Strip, or even in Jerusalem, and it makes like a clear comparison with what's happening with the Israeli citizens. And if we can take this like to other level to talk about the social media discrimination against Palestinians, we have observed and documented many discrimination cases that happened during or over the past month, where we observed and documented between 6th of May and 19th of May over 500 cases for Palestinian content takedown or account suspensions because they were reflecting or talking about the documentation of the human rights violations that we are exposed to. Many of these cases were false positive. Hamle, as the trusted partner for the social media companies, we were escalating to them these cases and we were asking for a clarification or to restore these cases, and we were able to restore many of them. And because of that, we can see like there is discriminatory policies and that being used by the social media companies and biased content moderation policies that are implemented on the Palestinian content. While on the other hand, we also see like, or we claim that there is a discrimination because we have also observed many groups and content from the extremist Israelis where they were discussing and where they were sharing hate speech and incitement, and also where they were inciting against Palestinians, organizing and mobilizing themselves to attack Palestinians in the street, especially in the mixed cities like Haifa, Yafa, Akka, Lid. So we are talking about these groups, these public posts, but some of them, they came from Israeli officials. This kind of content, it was not taken down. So we are talking about biased policies that came from the social media companies and were implemented. We feel like the Palestinian content is over moderated. It's been censored, and many we have many false positive cases. False positive mean that these cases were taken down, and when we appeal them, we were able to restore them because they are not violating the community standards. And by saying so, we can know that there is a systematic efforts where the social media companies are attacking Palestinian content. And if we analyze what Israelis are doing for this to silence Palestinians on the social media platforms, we can say like the Israeli cyber unit is reporting systematically and sending a request to the social media companies to take down the Palestinian content. For example, the Israeli cyber unit, they send over 19,000 cases or requests to the social media companies over 2019. And 81% of these cases, they were positively accepted from the social media companies. That means the Israeli government and the Israeli cyber unit are affecting or are impacting the social media companies when it comes to the Palestinian content. And this is really causing harm on the Palestinian narrative and on the Palestinian political discourse on the online space and on the social media platforms. On the other hand, we see like there is a gongo or a governmental operated NGOs where there is a platforms or applications for Israelis and pro-Israelis around the world to organize and mobilize themselves to play with the algorithms of the social media companies to take down the Palestinian content. So when they observe Palestinian content that was not taken down because of their request, they can share it on these platforms, and they can ask these supporters to report this content in a systematic way. And when the social media companies are receiving thousands of reports on a specific post or on a specific account, they will take it down because they will feel like this is something harming their community standards, even if it's not. Because of that, the AI sometimes is biased, and it's not really fair to have this kind of content moderation policies. And because of that, we were asking the social media companies to apply or to provide us with a detailed transparency report where we can understand why they are taking down the Palestinian content. Why are we being silenced on these platforms? And till now, they have this transparency report, but it's not really transparent because, for example, there is a difference between there is a difference between the number of cases that the social media companies are mentioning and the number of cases that the Israeli cybercrime unit are mentioning. Even the Israeli cybercrime unit, they are proud of taking down the Palestinian content. And because of that, we are asking for much more transparent policies when it comes to the moderation of the Palestinian content on the social media platforms. Other than that, a couple of months ago, like in March, Facebook have announced about their human rights policies, but we did not really touch where is their human rights policy in this attack. Because as I mentioned from before, our content and our narrative, it was attacked, it was taken down, while the Israeli incitement posts, it was not taken down. And even if they are violating the community standards of the social media platforms. And for example, now, because we have observed also other kind of violations where they are not taking down the Palestinian content, but they have this kind of violation, which is geo-blocking, or they have shadow banning, where they can reduce your viewership for your stories and for your posts, but not deleting it. And by doing so, they are also affecting the spread of the Palestinian narrative on the social media platforms. And because of all of these systematic discriminatory policies, we have this organized campaigns against the social media companies, and specifically against Facebook and specifically against Facebook and Instagram, because there was a huge amount of cases on these two platforms. And the last thing, in our report, where we observed 500 cases of digital rights violations, we observed like 85% of them, they were on Instagram and Facebook. And later on, we observed tens of cases for Palestinian journalists who were banned or their accounts were suspended on WhatsApp because they are sharing news pieces about Hamas. And we are talking about the social media companies' policies. They are taking the Palestinian content when it has the word Hamas, or it has the Al-Jabha al-Sha'biyya, which is like the Palestinian left parties and so on, because they are mentioned on the U.S. Department of State terrorist list. But when it comes to the content or the news, it should not be taken down because they are not taking the Palestinian context into consideration. And if they are taking the Palestinian content into consideration, they will think that this is a piece of news that should be shared. And sometimes maybe we are criticizing them, and sometimes we are sharing news about them. When we are writing Hamas or we are writing about other left parties, it's not necessary that we are supporting them. Sometimes we are sharing the news or we are criticizing. And because of that, we feel like social media companies, they are not adapting the Palestinian context into their policies. And because of that, we feel like their policies are biased and are not really fair for Palestinian issue.
Thank you, Mona, for talking about the politicization of social media platforms as well. I have another question for you, considering the recent incidents, especially considering the targeting of international media by the Israeli forces. Do you think it is a manifestation of the Israeli frustration in relation to the diminishing influence of the Western media, for example, by outlets like Al Jazeera?
Sorry, can you repeat your question, because I did not hear the first part because of the internet problem.
Okay, no problem. So I'll repeat. So considering the targeting of the international media by the Israeli forces, do you think it is a manifestation of the Israeli frustration in relation to the diminishing influence of the international media, which is largely controlled by them, and through new outlets like Al Jazeera, for example? So what are your views on this? Why they are targeting the international media now, which never really happened before like this way?
I mean, as I mentioned in the first intervention, we feel like this is an attack on information, and because of that, they are attacking any media outlet or any way that we can share our story through that. And because they have this issue, they attack that building for AP and for Al Jazeera in Gaza Strip. They even attacked journalists on the ground where they were covering the forced displacement of the Sheikh Jarrah people. I'm pretty sure that you saw the arrest of Al Jazeera correspondent a couple of days ago, and also you saw the other one on the next day, which is Najwan Simri, where she was attacked by a sound bomb. So there is an attack on the Palestinian journalists and also on the Palestinian human rights defenders, because they were vocal over the past 2 months. They were sharing the Palestinian narrative. They were affecting, and they were trying to change the public awareness and the international public awareness about the Palestinian cause. And because of that, because Israel, they feel like this is really affect their plans to force to make this forced displacement for people at Sheikh Jarrah or at Salwan, or even when it was in Gaza Strip, they were attacking the media outlets, and also the journalists, and also as well as the human rights defenders on the ground. I mean, not only the registered journalists or the big international media. We also saw a couple of days ago when they arrested Muna al-Kurd and Muhammad al-Kurd. Muna al-Kurd and Muhammad al-Kurd, they are journalists. They are still students, but they are journalists, and they are human rights defenders, where they are defending their homes from being stolen by the Israeli settlers. And because they went vocal and they are talking loudly about these human rights violations that people at Sheikh Jarrah are exposed to, the Israeli forces, they arrest them, they integrated them, and we heard from them through their posts and through their tweets about how they were treated during the integration hours. I mean, this is like a grave escalation in human rights violations against us, against Palestinians, even in the streets or also on the online platforms like the social media platforms and other platforms. And I can mention to you a couple of examples about the social media, the technology companies. Violations against Palestinians. For example, the Israeli Strategic Ministry, the Israeli Strategic Ministry Affairs, they have this promoted ads on YouTube where they were explaining and promoting why they have this attack on Gaza Strip. They were promoting for people that they are attacking Gaza Strip, and they have this aggression because they want to defend their citizens and they want to protect them. And by doing so, they are promoting violence. They are promoting incitement. They are, I mean, it's a clear incitement that they have this kind of violence because they feel it should be people on the ground should be attacked because they give themselves an execution to protect the Israeli citizens. And I mean, this is like also we can't understand how a platform like YouTube is accepting that. This is like a clear promotion of violence that's happened against Palestinians. And on the other hand, we have also observed other violations. For example, Google Maps, they are systematically discriminating against Palestinians. They should be providing the Google Maps service, so they should be reliable for people. And when it comes to Gaza Strip, first of all, the maps in Gaza Strip, they were blurred. You can't see clearly what's happening on the ground. They were not updating their maps, so you can't see when a specific building was bombed. You can't see it's bombed, so it's not updated. And also, you can't see the streets names and other details that should be reflected there, as they are reflecting that in other parts of the world, even in Tel Aviv. So we are talking about clear discrimination from other social media platforms against Palestinians.
Thank you very much, Mona. It's really enlightening to learn from you about the on-the-ground realities, especially this example of the Google map, I think, is an important one. That's why such an important service is not available to the Palestinians. So while talking about social media, I see that there is a question from Amna Tohidi. So she's asking a question, and Mona, now it's only you here. So it's to you that who's controlling the narrative on social media? Is there a lobby of big powers, or are social media giants forming a lobby within themselves? So basically the question is about who's controlling the narrative on social media with reference to Palestine.
Well, as I mentioned before, we feel the Palestinian narrative is being attacked because of the systematic efforts that the Israeli government are putting on social media companies, or they are investing to silence Palestinians on the online space. So we feel like the Israeli narrative or the Israeli propaganda is being promoted. Sorry about that. So we feel like there is this caused a silence of Palestinian voices on the social media platform, and it also make an open space, make the social media platforms as an open space to share the Israeli propaganda. And as I mentioned before, they have systematic efforts where the Israeli cybercrime unit, they have their own pressure on the social media companies, where on the other hand, they have this gongo platforms where they are playing with the algorithms as a trolls to report the Palestinian content. And there is also other cases where, for example, they are using their surveillance technologies to silence Palestinians. For example, people who went to Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Israeli intelligence service, they use the GPS thing to track them, and then they send them an SMS message to threaten them and to intimidate them to be held accountable later. Other human rights defenders, they got phone calls from the Israeli intelligence service. They told them if they are not deleting the documentation of the human rights violations that they posted on the social media companies, they will hold them accountable. So we are talking about systematic efforts by the Israeli government to silence Palestinian narrative and Palestinian discourse from the online space. And also there is a preference with the social media companies where we are being silenced because they are complying with the Israeli request to take down the Palestinian content, and because also of their biased content moderation policies. As I mentioned, there is the social media companies are not adapting the Palestinian content. They are not the context. They are not adapting. For example, if we use the word martyr or the word resistance in a specific post, this post could be taken down because it has one of these two words, and these two words are in the Palestinian context are normal to be used because they are describing, the martyr is describing someone who was killed by the Israeli forces, and the resistance is the normal word that we are using to talk about the daily resistance that we are living in. So they are not adapting the Palestinian context, and because of that, they are also killing the Palestinian stories, killing the Palestinian narratives, and affecting the Palestinian narrative. And if we did not have this kind of censorship from the social media companies, we would expect that the kind of coverage that we got over the past month would be slightly different. We would have a better coverage. We would have a better even social media exposure to pro-Palestinians and to solidarity groups around the world, where they can hear the Palestinian voices and where they could collaborate with us and amplify our voices. And because social media companies, they are aware of the problems and the bugs, quote unquote, they announce about a few changes in their policies, for example, about the algorithm changes, but it's not enough, because this specific detailed policy is related to the viewership, but it's not related, for example, to the content takedown. It's not related to the account suspension. So they are a bit like they are making small changes, but what we need is a clear human rights policy that's dealing or gives a fair space to Palestinian and open space to share our stories and our narrative on the online space.
Thank you, Mona. So now you can catch your breath while I'll take up the next question, because Ambassador Durrani is facing some internet issues. And
I
also
have to go because I have another webinar. So I'm so sorry, I won't be able to continue with you. But it was my pleasure to join you today.
It was a pleasure to listen to you, because we learned a lot, and we wish you all the best. And hopefully in near future, we'll have you back and we can expand this discussion. And I'll try to answer the next questions in collaboration with Mr. Janjua. If he is here, I can see him on the screen. So thank you, Mona.
Thank you very much. Of course. Bye-bye.
I'll take up the question on the OIC and its role in conflict resolution, because I've been doing some research in recent years on the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So basically, the Palestinian issue was the key issue that brought all the Muslim countries together, irrespective of their differences on other political issues. So in 1967, if you may recall, after the arsenic attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the OIC was established. And so this has been a consistent agenda item on the OIC. But the progress has been very little with reference to conflict resolution in this matter. And also the OIC has been suffering from other issues, for example, in terms of differences on sectarian lines, and also geopolitical differences involving, for example, Iran and Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. And so it's hard to say how to the degree to which the OIC can really influence the key players in this conflict, Israel and its key supporter, the US, for example. And then Hamza Rifat has asked a very interesting question, that do you think that the Palestinian advocacy pages on social media are equivalent to, for example, information war? It's an interesting question. I wish Mona could further elaborate on this, but I feel that she actually had answered in many different ways the same question. And so finally, I'm just skipping a lot of questions, because and perhaps I can pose this question to Mr. Janjua here as well after I answer this, that why Muslims don't disseminate the narrative of Islamophobia, why Western world are not strictly enforcing this narrative. It's a very timely question, considering the sad incident that happened in Canada just yesterday, and in which 4 Muslims were killed and one is seriously injured, a young boy. Considering that, also, I think it's relevant. I think Pakistan and Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been actually focusing a lot on Islamophobia and under the current government, and raising this issue in various forums globally. But I think the key aspect is to a degree to which our media can be expanded to promote this narrative around the world. And our media has a limited coverage. Look at the media outlets around the Muslim world. It's good to see Al Jazeera coming up and TRT and so on. But overall, the viewership of our other media outlets is very limited. And with this, I go back to Mr. Janjua here, because I know that he has been studying this issue very closely as well. So Mr. Rashid Wali Janjua, what do you think of this question, that why Muslims don't disseminate the narrative on Islamophobia?
Right. So the answer to that question is rooted in the way the identity narratives are being constructed globally at the moment. And if you relate this aspect to the Palestinian-Israeli issue, we know that in this identity construction process began with the settlement, and it's an issue of a colonial settler mentality, that they come and try and erase the old identities and create new identities. And whenever these identities are in conflict, then what we know, Joan Galtung mentions the cultural violence, which is the erosion of the symbols of identity of a culture which is under subjugation, that gives rise to inherent conflict. And these symbols of cultural violence are epistemic also, these are academic also, these are military also, and political, mayors, those are all tools toward this fostering of this epistemic militarism, which is in fact erosion of the cultural identity. Now the same thing is happening at the global stage. From this we can extrapolate to the global stage, wherein a Muslim identity, which is rooted in the culture and the traditions and not in the specific religious texts, those are being countenanced as threats to the rival cultures. Now it's a reverse osmosis of cultural violence. This reverse osmosis term I've just coined to depict the kind of cultural deprivation that those cultures are trying to impose upon the Islamic identity, which use the same tools to culturally enslave and subjugate in Palestine, in North Africa, and even in Southeast Asia. So in many ways, this is redolent of a post-colonial, subjugation narrative. The Islamophobia, which is rife throughout the world, and it's recently given manifestation in a country which is known for its multicultural tolerance, that is Canada. So that's amazing, that how these violent narratives get seeped in and why there is no rebuttal. I think on our part, in all humbleness, Pakistan's level, the attempt has been made at government channels. Even our Prime Minister went on to UN General Assembly and for the first time very clearly articulated the concept of the cultural violence, the hurt, and the damage it does to individual communities' psyche. There is a greater need, however, at the social media platforms, and there's a greater need of penetration even through the mainstream media to get this message across to the world, that this is, demonizing a religion is akin to demonizing humanity. There are, the West is big on human rights terms. There's a Human Rights Watch, and there's a Genocide Watch, and there are a plethora of institutions which are doing the advocacy of human rights. But there's a very thin line between the human rights and the religious rights. We need to clarify this distinction, that what they refer to as a medieval superstitious, adherence to religious tenets is in fact our adherence to your individual belief system, which is rooted in your individualisms. And those are the very qualities that the West espouses and celebrates, very jealously. They guard it very jealously. Individualism, individual freedoms, liberty, egalitarianism. So all these things are rooted for the Muslim community into their human rights, which the religious identity is an embodiment of. And in cultures such as in Europe, United States, and even in certain African countries, now this distinction needs to be eroded. And I think not only at media channels, but I think in academic channels, there is a need to get this message across. I think after Chomsky, Edward Said, and I'm reminded of Dr. Iqbal Ahmed, who was a champion of cultural narratives for the Muslims, and he used to speak in the language and idiom in which the West understood. I think our academics and the social and the media, they need to bring about a greater convergence in their efforts to get this message across that Islamophobia is bad and how it impacts the individual human rights of Muslims. But a humble attempt has been made at Pakistan's level, but more needs to be done. So I hope I have answered the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Janjua. I know that now Mr. Zishan had unmuted to say a few words. But before that, just to sum up, I think Mona made some very interesting points with reference to the dehumanization of Palestinians through the media outlets controlled by the apartheid regime of Israel. And in this context, social media provides a new platform for activists who want to communicate the reality on the ground. So it was really enlightening to listen to Mona on this. And also, Ambassador Saab made a very interesting point, and Mona also endorsed it, with reference to the use of terminologies like conflict that equally puts the blame on the Palestinians. So there is a rampant use of such terminologies, and I think we have to create a narrative that questions the use of such terminologies in this context. So now over to Mr. Zishan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahid, and I must commend you for an excellent job at moderating this webinar. Now, I would request our acting president, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, to present his vote of thanks to Dr. Zahid and the rest of the speakers for their participation in the webinar. So over to you, please.
Thanks, Ishan. At the end, I commend Dr. Zahid, like always, and expected. He's moderated the session very ably. And I think had it not been for his very penetrating questions, the session would have been, remiss. I'll only recap very quickly a few points that were made by the panelists. And one of them was that social media and mainstream media has become a great enabler in this world of communication revolution. And while it has become an enabler, it has also become a stultifier, because there's a need for greater transparency and a level playing field for all communities. And the Palestinians, as Mona mentioned, are being given a short shrift on especially social media platforms, their presence and their, the taking down of their content and allowing the rival content. That's an area in which a lot of transparency is required. The second most important point is the acceptance of the narratives and the lessons of history. We know that a cultural violence is being perpetrated and a complete siege and blockade has been imposed, and a dehumanization and construction of a new reality is being attempted. And the world must stand up and take note of a continual siege since last 15 years. That is the most important message, that we have seen 3 big wars, and this is the 4th one, and all those are Operation Cast-led, Operation protracted siege in 2014 we saw, and this is yet the 4th manifestation of that war. But these are all feeble attempts on part of incarcerated Gazan community to break the siege. So breaking the siege is the main message. I think if we can use all channels to put across this message to the world, maybe the state of Palestinians and the Gazans is taken note of by the world community. So I once again thank Dr. Zayed and Mona was left for a very enlightening discourse. We all stand educated, and we would look forward to many such interactions in future as well. So thank you from my side.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings an end to today's webinar. Thank you all for your active participation. And once again, a very big thank you to all the speakers and Dr. Zahid for moderating the session. Please stay tuned and follow IPRI on all our social media platforms to keep up with our upcoming publications and our events as well. That's it from today, and have a good evening. Assalamu alaikum.